All right, there we go. Does everyone just want to grab a seat? We'll go ahead and get started here. Back. So, great to hear. I'm David Sachs from Craft Ventures. Excited to be Miami HackWeek, a day of AI panels and content. And Don is here at HackWeek panel. I'll just tell you the schedule really quickly, and then I'll turn over to. So the first panel is called "When AI Learns to See, Hear, Imitate." The second panel is going to be sales and AI work from Craft, and then the third panel are AI-powered work in 10 years. And Seth Chapman from. And then I think there's a happy hour that we're doing. All right, at 5 o'clock at Freehold. How we wrap. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone for being here, and with that, I'll turn it on.
Hello, hello. All right, how's it going? Everybody's having a good tech week. Thank you so much for joining us. I know there's a bunch of events happening in Miami, so this one always a joy seeing here. If this is your first time doing anything like AI related, let me. You're like, what's this thing and what? Show of hands. Yeah, don't be shy. It could be a little scary. Okay, nice. So, I mean, we'll keep the conversation going so everybody can understand what's going on. If you're like deep in the AI world, working on an AI project, probably like use like ChatGPT a couple times. Can I see those hands? Sounds good. Well, we're gonna have a pretty exciting panel today. Talking about when sees, hear, and imitate. The amazing guests joining me, and I'll just give them an opportunity. Themselves, just like jump.
Pranjali, pattern C, actual doc.
At home, discovery. Life this in 20 million.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm Jadon. I'm HackWeek tech event. So yeah, so let's just like kick it off. I think maybe the first thing we need to is this all doom and gloom as it relates to or does it the just like concern what's going on? Having
I think we are. And I also think panel might now when bots are going to browse the web very quick.
I think there's a lot of upside to AI, obviously. So it's kind of like the internet moment, right? Again, I would say a lot of people think it's the iPhone moment. I think it's the internet moment. It's like a lot more, it's larger than just another medium coming out. It feels like there's ways to do things that weren't possible 5 years ago. I mean, even 24 months ago, 12 months ago. Some things seem like they were impossible 3 months ago and are possible today. So it's extremely moving really quickly. And I think there's tons of new types of tasks that are going to be available, tons of new types of jobs that are going to be created. And I think we're just scratching the surface on what's possible right now. So it'll take a little bit of time to settle. But I think it's kind of like the best time to be building something right now. There's tons of opportunities. There's tons of uncertainty, but that kind of, the uncertainty creates those opportunities. So there's like gems that are hidden, and if you scratch enough, you'll find them.
Yeah, I think right now people are seeing AI replace not entire jobs, but parts of their jobs, so activities. You could say for, like 69 or 70% of knowledge work, people are seeing it replace like at least a fourth of the activities that they do on a daily basis for work. But yeah, I think it's going to take a while for us to see sort of that long-term net positive of, like an economic surplus generated by AI, new jobs, and us sort of settling into, a new world, a new economy.
Yeah, and I think you kind of like brought something up that's pretty cool. Now is like the perfect time to be building in the space. So maybe we can like jump a little bit more in terms of like what you guys are building, and like what's happening in these unique areas, right? So I mean, there's like e-commerce, there's computer vision, stuff that you're doing with audio. Like typically when people are thinking now, at least today, about artificial intelligence, the first thing is around like generative content. But some of the work that you guys are doing is a little bit different. So can you just like talk about what's happening in your industry?
Yeah, so we're in fashion e-commerce, and I'm very impressed by GPT-4, the latest model, and it hasn't been fully released yet, but it can work with visual input very well. And that's very powerful, just to get a very deep understanding of like what's the actual style behind this product, and so forth, which is very useful for the algorithms we build. And then in terms of generative content, fashion customers, they care a lot about brand. So when they sell product, they always want to have a story tied to it. So a lot of our customers manually create landing pages right now. So let's say you have Coachella coming up, then you create a landing page, a collection page with Coachella, you curate outfits and so forth. And what we can do now, we just played around with APIs. You have a prompt, Coachella or whatever, and automatically you get a visually merchandise curated page. We can generate the copy, we can generate the banners. I think with models like Midjourney and so forth, you will literally be able to put the fashion models in Coachella, right? You'll put the actual outfit we recommend on the models. You will be able to personalize, so I want this model to look older, if this is an old person, younger, size, body type, ethnicity. And when you can do this, you can take like, okay, what are the top 1,000 SEO terms we want to rank on? Let's automatically generate a landing page for that. What are the TikTok trends we want to work with? So there's a lot of things that I think will change, and that's kind of the things we're looking at going into right now.
Yeah, so I think the way that we look at AI is how usable is it? Multimodal experiences are extremely interesting right now when you combine some of these modalities together. I think if I were to ask the audience, when was the last time this is at least in our domain, when was the last time you saw a movie that looked absolutely gorgeous? You could probably think of a few, right? Transformers, Mad Max, etc. But if I asked you when was the last time you saw a movie that you thought had brilliant dialogue, it's kind of hard to think of one. People who listen to audiobooks here. When was the last time you bought an audiobook? You made the purchase, you're like, this audiobook, that's amazing reviews. And you started within the first 5 minutes, you're like, I can't do it. I can't listen to this individual talk for the next 8 hours, right? And one of the things that we were really excited about when we started 4 years ago was making audio malleable. Having this ability to kind of open a tool and kind of change audio that's been recorded already. And that's where we see a lot of use cases for us come in, where audio editing becomes so much simpler, audio creation becomes so much simpler. And I think a big area of focus now for us, and with a lot of other tools that exist out there, GPT-4, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, I'm sure everyone in the room has tried to use DALL-E or Stable Diffusion, every time I try using it, I get stick figures. And I don't know what commas to add and where to put the 4K exactly, how many, maybe it's 8K, et cetera. But I think one thing that we really need to work on now is kind of fine-tuning these models, getting to behave in a controlled manner. You know, artists typically care about every single pixel of what you're looking at, right? So that matters. It matters how the blade of grass looks, and if it looks 90% real or right, that's probably not good enough. You know, so that's where we're trying to head towards in terms of product. And I think a lot of the folks, my colleagues that are working in the generative AI space, apart from voice and image and text, et cetera, it's kind of the last 10% that makes it unusable right now for a lot of users. It's really good for a great demo, and it's really good for like a presentation, but it's that last 10% that kind of makes it impossible to sell or makes it impossible to kind of use like you use Photoshop today. And I think that's where we're really trying to bridge the gap.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think hallucination in generative AI in general is something that sort of adds to that, adds to the problem of ChatGPT, where these tools by themselves just being a toy for most people that are onboarded to the platform or using it. Yeah, I think increasing interpretability, relevancy, and accuracy is going to change the game for almost all industries.
Yeah, I mean, I for one, big Siri guy. Like I'm literally locked into like the iPhone ecosystem, and using like the AI functions on my phone just make like my general experience like so much better. Like I love just being able to like go to photos. I can type like dog, and it literally just like pulls up all the images with dogs in my photo gallery, and I have tons of pictures. And then like Siri, I have like those little home pods around my house, everything like, hey Siri, like what's this, what's that, or hey Siri, find my keys. So I mean, I'm pretty like, as like a general consumer, I'm like pretty excited about like what AI could potentially mean. But there are limitations, right? I'm like Jamaican, and I cannot talk to Siri in Jamaican patois. So what are like some of the limitations we're seeing with AI, not only from just like like very like simple like like language barriers, but like the ability for the technology still, and like it's very intense on computing power. Like, what are some of the limitations we're seeing in the space now?
Yeah, I guess what I have to say is I'm very optimistic. Like it's hard for me to see limitations coming up. I'm very optimistic about where things are going. There's of course short-term things that you can identify, but I think a lot of the things we would point out here.
And what do you think are some of those short-term things?
It's a broad thing. Like one thing is just how, let's say you take ChatGPT, how can it interact with facts in a good way? Right now there's the hallucination problem, and the way it's architected, there's like no way to really prove like, okay, is this a fact in a good way? So I think that can be something. It's not hooked up to like a database in a good way. So there are people who try to like identify how does this language model store the concept of Paris, let's say, in the model. And what you can see is that it's done in a very inefficient way. Even though it's very powerful, it could be massively improved if it had access to like just a relational database, for instance. And I think there's a lot of improvement there, for instance.
Yeah, I would say there's limits to the power of computing that we have right now. I think that's also the only thing that's honestly stopping us from just going faster and faster in terms of iteration cycles in AI. It's already like at a pace where it's hard to keep up, as sort of an AI enthusiast. But yeah, I think it's just about access to enough data that's going to make these models more and more inclusive and capable.
If anyone has GPUs, I'll buy them off of you after this talk. I think one of the issues that I see at least is there's tons of academic work that's published. one of the reasons that OpenAI has been so good is that they've actually been able to productize something. And they've made it really easy for people to use, right? I remember when Bing first announced that they integrated ChatGPT or some sort of GPT into their search engine, it was still very hard. Actually, if you go to like Bing.com today, there's like on the top right, there's some rewards that for some reason they're still like trying to sell to you. There's like tons of other stuff that's happening, right? And one of the things that needs to happen now, which I think is like really critical, is unlearning. So I had the unfortunate time of working at a company called Research in Motion, which eventually turned to like BlackBerry. That's one of the things that didn't do really well is unlearn, right? So when things shifted, they got stuck in this area. And I think right now we're in an era that everything could be unlearned and then kind of recreated better than it was before. So a really quick example of this is if you think about UX and UI, you interact with a web page, but that has certain limitations. My friend here probably talk a lot more than I can about e-commerce websites and the hundreds of layers and the complicated site maps that exist. But if you were to like dig into one of those site maps, there's hidden pages that are dozens of layers, levels below, right? And that information doesn't get surfaced that well. So things like that can be reimagined when you add natural language into the mix of things, right? So in 2014, 2015, you had like Alexa and Google Assistant, Facebook RIP, that attempted to kind of surface that information in interesting ways. And I think like unlearning is one of the things that we have to do really well right now.
And so one very interesting thing, Pranjali is actually 16 years old. Met her 16, right? Yeah, met her like 2 years ago at the first Miami HackWeek. HF0 is my co-founder, Dave, actually invested into her company. She joined her fellowship. But Pranjali, I'm very intrigued in terms of what like builders your age, like the next generation of like, the people would probably see like the greatest upside from the advancement of AI. Like, how are you guys like thinking about building in this space right now?
Yeah, actually, it's a great question. So, in the handful of like teenage founders I know, there's like 0 that I know that actually work or are working in AI. Just met one today. Well, not technically teen, but still. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of young founders that I know that are sort of exploring the space as is, but I think in general, everyone that is sort of like looking at AI with a new vision of transforming an industry or such is, I think, is thinking about like optimizing processes that have traditionally been like really slow, or are mainly like intensively knowledge work or creative work that could be a lot more efficient. Not replaced by AI, but do a lot of the work that people have been spending hours and hours on and tends to be redundant. So yeah, I think that could be applied to a bunch of different industries. I mean, we're doing that for text. People are doing that for programming. There's a lot of different areas where you can integrate AI into already today. But yeah, I think that's the approach that that most visionary founders are looking at AI with.
And to the rest of the panel, like, what does the world actually look like when AI starts to see, hear, and imitate?
I think something we should really, look. It's coming is web agents. Very good web agents that can browse the web autonomously. They can understand a website that it hasn't seen before and can extract data and can interact with the website autonomously. And what that enables is the ability to train models like reinforcement learning agents that you say, hey, I want you to figure out how to buy an arbitrary product on this e-commerce page for me, let's say, and it can learn how to do that. Or there's just a limitless amount of those tasks. So RPA is a field where that's going to change a lot. And the reason I think web agents are going to be so much better now is I've been doing some experimentation in just the text version of GPT-4. Is really good at doing stuff there, like web scraping is changing very much. But I've also done some experiment with a visual input. and there it's insane. You render a web page, give it the visual background. It can, if you want to, you can like recode the whole website, but you can also say, okay, given this screenshot, give me the CSS selector for the add a cart button or something like that. So it's a little bit scary also, since I feel that's the path to Terminator, if that makes sense. So.
The thing that excites me the most in the future is kind of the unknown. So I think one example that I really look at, and one of our investors really early on told us about this, is he looked at me and said, "You don't know what you're building." And that was like probably the best advice I got. And the reason for that is because if you look at something called YouTube, right? YouTube probably wasn't. I'm sure the founders of YouTube did not think YouTube is what it is today when they started. Actually, it was pretty far off. But through the iPhone, the ability for every smartphone to have cameras, democratizing video building and filmmaking, et cetera. You know, there's folks like Mr. Beast who are producing content that is, surpasses what shows on Netflix get in terms of traction. I think one of the things that are really interesting with generative AI is that democratization of these tools it's becoming more accessible now. So we work with like large game studios, and we work with small game studios. We work with like small production houses, and some of the most interesting things are they're actually able to use voice, whereas in the past it was restricted for them. We do a lot of language dubbing, so taking like a cast of 5 people and transforming them into 52 locales and languages. And to your point earlier, Jadan, that just opens up this huge opportunity to make content accessible to different demographics. We work with folks in like Iran, for example, who are building Persian shows, and they're transforming this content into English or Italian, etc. In some cases, we've seen some even work that's done in the middle. So we have like folks that have like the producer or director is sitting in one area. They do all the script writing in their native language, but then it goes to animation. The animation folks are sitting in Italy. They don't understand a single word of Farsi. And they're trying to animate this thing that they don't understand what's going on, right? So they could use text translation, but one of the things that's really helpful is we can automatically dub all of that content from one language to another. Now they're able to get that kind of feeling of that character. Language models have gotten so much better that you're actually able to translate, not literally, but kind of have an informal translation of what's going on. So you have this like nice little workflow that's built out really well, where folks are able to do things that were kind of impossible maybe a year from today, which is like editing content and adding voiceovers, adding like visual effects that were extremely difficult to do prior to all of this generative AI stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds a little bit terrifying. The whole like Terminator stuff is definitely a little scary. But I mean, I'm in like full agreement that the evolution of AI is like net positive, and you're right? Like history is perhaps the best teacher, and even though like there's been big calls for us to like slow down the development of AI, but that's one of the arguments that I've heard. It's like history is probably like the best teacher, and the thing we may be like trying to avoid may not actually be like the problem that we have to deal with. Obviously, like,
yeah, I'm not sure it's net positive in the long run. Actually, I think we kind of opened the Pandora's box, so there's no way going back. But I feel like we're way behind in AI safety and just society keeping up with this. So why am I part of it? Is, well, it's going to happen, so you want to be involved in it and to nudge it in the best direction that you can. But I think this is the most important period ever in humanity, probably, which we're facing now. So it's nice for purpose, you have a purpose, but it's also impending doom potentially as well. So.
Yeah, I think that's a segue to, I just have like 2 more questions and then we wrap up. But I leave like 10 minutes at the end for the audience to ask questions, and that's just gonna work. If you have a question, like 5 minutes or so, you can just stand in the middle. We'll hand the mic, you can ask the panelists whatever you'd like. But this is a really good segue into, I think the thing that's on everybody's mind. It's like, as we think about like the ethics of AI, right? Like as builders, how are you guys thinking about mitigating some of these risks ahead of time and building more like consciously as we're like getting into this like unknown territory?
I think minimizing bias in data sets that go into the actual sort of engine in the back end, I think that's one place to start. I think, models by themselves aren't conscious. I think there's a lot of like misinformation and propaganda as to at least the larger spectrum of the population. Not a lot, the larger spectrum hasn't like tried ChatGPT or doesn't have access to like these high-end like large language models. So I think their perspective towards what the world in the next 10 years is going to look like is fueled by a lot of misinformation online and media. But as a builder, I think starting by mitigating bias is one way to limit like the actual sort of like negatives of generative AI.
Yeah,
Yeah, there, as many of you have seen on the news, there was like a letter for people to pause building super big, large models like GPT-4 for 6 months. I think that is a good idea. What they're saying is, they're not saying pause AI development for 6 months. They're saying very specifically for the companies that are working on creating these huge models, we have GPT-4, it's good enough, let's pause there and let governments and so forth keep up. I think that's, I think it's a good idea, and it's good that there's pressure on that kind of stuff.
So yeah, I think there's like, the way that we perceive this problem is like in multiple layers. The first is from a platform perspective, from the builder perspective, every company has has the ability to create provisions around it to make sure that they are deploying their application safely, right? So one of the things that we do at least is we created a neural watermark such that every file that we are outputting can be validated by us. And then we test it against various attacks, make sure that an audio file can't be destroyed or destructive in some way such that we can't detect that it's ours. So there's like layers that we can control as a platform. And then there's layers that I think are more community driven, have to do with distribution. So we actually open source the model that could detect deepfake audio. And we publish the weights and everything out there too. And one of the goals there is, the best way of tackling generative AI is with models that are able to do the opposite, that are able to detect what is generated, what's not. Adobe already proved this with Photoshop. They have a model out there that can detect 99% accuracy, can detect Photoshop. OpenAI has a content filter, and it has a way of detecting whether OpenAI generates some content. So I think distribution is one aspect of the second layer of things that we need to be careful about. And then after that, we have a responsibility to the users such that a lot of the folks that we work with, at least, have taken the proactive approach of telling users that what you're about to see is AI generated. So a lot of folks in entertainment are pretty used to this, and actually they've been using it as marketing material. So you've probably seen in a theater, you sit down before the movie, 10 minutes before they show you behind the scenes of how the movie's made, right? And they're basically breaking down all these visual effects that you're gonna see. Matt Damon isn't gonna drown today, right? The water's fake. And so a lot of that stuff is already kind of ingrained into like educating the user as to what's about to happen. And once the user is aware and they're indulging in whatever the material it is or consuming it, they necessarily don't care whether it's fake or real. And I think that'll just become normal over time. I think there are a lot of questions around attribution. I think that's a very interesting topic. I don't think there's a great answer for that yet. But I think the last layer there is user behavior. But I think we shouldn't just put out the AI and expect users to just behave properly. I think there needs to be these layers of concern that need to go in before, in order to protect the user or educate the user about what's about to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. And I mean, full agree. I guess there's just general consensus that yes, there are things that we need to be mindful of, and we have to take those practical steps to avoid like potential externalities that may come from the development of this technology. Yeah. So, I mean, we have 10 minutes. We can take questions. Does anybody have questions or yeah, but can we just like do the middle right here, and we have a mic that we can pass around. Yeah, sure, right here. I think there's a next mic, but we'll use this one for now.
Yeah, I'm curious what our panelists think about whether or not large language models, especially as compute catches up, which I think it eventually will, are we going to see more the concept of Paris is like stored in the weights like you're talking about, or are we going to see some sort of new like database emerge that all language models have access to and have access to huge amounts of data? Or is it going to be like a bigger and bigger brain that like knows more and more things? Which way do you see that going?
Did everybody hear the question? You couldn't hear. Sorry.
Yeah.
Did you guys get your question? Okay.
You heard the question.
Yeah,
Cool.
he's just
Cool.
asking. Like, if we're just gonna see, like, oh, sorry. He's asking about like what audience, like what our panelists think
Yep.
about large language models, and what the evolution of that's going to like look like in the next couple of years.
So I talked about that earlier, that it, like factual information is quite inefficiently stored in these models, and it makes sense to have access to some sort of more relational, very quick database. I think it's very new ground. Like we're seeing like the browsing plugin in ChatGPT, it browses the web, right? That feels inefficient given that they're browsing websites meant for humans, and what if you like give it the ability to like generate quite sophisticated, like a layer beneath in whatever Bing has as the search engine. What, like, okay, I want you to like almost like a Elasticsearch database query to let it do it itself, or you could have like one model that its job is to populate the database, so it like scours the web and somehow it interacts with the ChatGPT model, and then yeah, it can go back and forth. Then there's also AutoGPT, where it has the ability to add stuff to memory, which is kind of starting to look at this. So there might be some, like as it trains, it's like an AutoGPT model that is like, okay, oh, this Paris has come up a lot of times as a concept. Let's add it to memory. It's quite new ground.
I think the size of the models itself, I think that's not like one parameter, specifically accuracy and relevancy. Those two things are going to be like, those things are going to continue to improve in sort of like the newer developments.
Yeah, so somewhere in there is a great blockchain idea. So I think one way, from a programmer hat, I think the way I look at it is foundational models have like a lot of overlap. So I'm assuming like, you know, the training data that BART has, it has a significant overlap with the training data that GPT-4 has, et cetera. And everyone's kind of crawling the same data, right? So everyone has the same data source, which is the internet. So I think from a programmer's perspective, I think the paradigm that's going to change is inheritance, which is the ability to like, you take any of these large foundational models and then you tune them in a way that they learn in a very you build constraints around them. And I think that's like inheritance is an important aspect that will carry over to the new phase of development. I think there are definitely databases or a particular item that you pointed out that are probably like undergoing a massive amount of change, right? We've been stuck with like SQL databases, I mean, they work great, but we've been stuck with them for a while. Then we had like this, you know, NoSQL thing that came in with Mongo, and it was okay, right? Unless you're Facebook, it was okay. And then you had like Chroma and all these folks coming out with like all of a sudden like using a database doesn't require like a database engineer, right? You have an application engineer that simply feeds in a lot of this model. It's able to build relationships, and then you could query this like in this natural language manner. I think one of the nice things there, or one of the problems there actually, is how do we solve for determinism in some of these use cases, so that every time you query something, you kind of get good results back and not garbage. You know, my definition of Paris and not Janan's definition of Paris, right? It's like Paris, France, not Paris, Ontario, or something.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think in our product, like Delv specifically, we're doing research, and trying to make these models like fine-tuned to team-specific needs and domain specialization. So in that case, it's really important to make it constrained to their data. I think that's one of our main selling points as well. And currently, like, that's also what makes ChatGPT unusable for a lot of people that have research as a part of their workflows. And so yeah, constraining yourself to data that's relevant to the given context is sort of like the key here.
Yeah. Last thing, sorry. I think there are very promising papers using like embedding lookup. So it basically stores information. So it's like an embedding lookup database, you could say. So I think that's also very promising.
Cool. Yeah, we'll take a question from Jessica, and then I'll take your question. Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. This has been really informative. I have a question on the provenance side, or rather being able to trace it back to AI. What are your thoughts on what that might look like to make it easier for a consumer to be able to trace that the output was derived from AI?
Yeah, so the way I think about this is document e-signatures. So you have like these e-signatures that have existed that could be traced back to its original source. You signed on this day using Adobe Reader, Acrobat, etc. I think images, cameras have something very similar. You take a picture, there's metadata in that picture that'll tell you what day it was taken, what camera, etc. I think this will become the norm. It'll be kind of like everything will be signed, right? Just like today, you visit a website, you have that little padlock on the browser, and if that padlock doesn't exist, if the website isn't behind SSL, then the browser basically tells you you should proceed with caution, right? Some browsers basically say don't proceed at all, right? And I think that'll become the norm. I think like that migration took a little while to happen, and I think once it's happened a couple of times, and every time that it happens now, it gets quicker and quicker for us to adapt. So I think I think a lot of the content that will be AI generated will have some sort of regulation saying that it is AI generated. And then I wouldn't be surprised, I'm not surprised at all, if you try to upload a clip from the NFL to YouTube today, it actually stops you before you get there. Try to upload a song, it'll stop you before you get there, right? So that content doesn't even get uploaded. It stops you like in between that upload. I think that'll be very common as well. It'll, this AI generated content will have filters that'll determine like, oh, this is AI generated, this isn't, etc. And it'll basically prevent that content from being uploaded in the first place. Same thing with like information itself. You already have folks like Twitter that kind of place details whenever there is some sort of misinformation or some sort of fact that is not present in the original tweet. I think that'll just become more and more common, and I think users will or consumers will expect that to exist. And when it doesn't exist, there'll be more skepticism to the source that they're looking at. So.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that question traces back to user ethics as well. As we go into like a flurry of people using generative AI, I mean, one who must not be named, but NFTs, I think those could in some way be useful here in terms of like attaching like a token to like data that's been generated by an AI model. So you can actually like sort of make that connection if you like, especially in the field of research. I think there's a lot of people that have asked me, at least actually my customers, I'm like, can I add you like as an author to my paper, because that's sort of like an ethics issue, or I wonder how people using ChatGPT or at least fine-tuned models are gonna sort of balance that with publishing research that's supposed to be their own. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways we can work on like adding signatures to like LLM outputs.
Yeah.
I think you covered it quite well.
Yeah, so I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we unfortunately can't take any more questions, but hopefully some of the answers will come out in the sessions as we like go through the day And if I go over, then everybody else goes over, and then it just goes on, and then you're late for the happy hour. But thank you. Let's say thank you so much to the panelists. I think this is a really informative session. And I will go ahead and hand it back over for our next moderator. Hand it back over to David. Yep.